Heraclitus, though an Ionian, was not in the scientific tradition of the Milesians. He was a mystic and regarded fire as the fundamental substance, like flame in a fire. There is unity in the world, but it is a unity formed by the combination of opposites. All things come out of the one, and the one out of all things. But the many have less reality than the one, which is God. Heraclitus believed fire to be the primordial element, out of which everything else had arisen. Thales thought everything was made of water. Anaximenes thought air was the primitive element. Heraclitus preferred fire, and Empedocles suggested a statesmanlike compromise by allowing four elements: the earth, air, fire, and water. The chemistry of the ancients stopped dead at this point. No further progress was made in the science until the Mohammedan alchemists embarked upon their search for the philosopher's stone, the elixir of life, and a method of transmuting base metals into gold. The metaphysics of Heraclitus are sufficiently dynamic to satisfy the most hustling of moderns. This world, which is the same for all, no one of gods or men has made, but it was ever, is now, and ever shall be an ever-living fire, with measures kindling and measures going out. In such a world, perpetual change was to be expected, and perpetual change was what Heraclitus believed in. He had, however, another doctrine on which he set even more store than on the perpetual flux. This was the doctrine of the mingling of opposites. The doctrine that everything is in a state of flux is the most famous of the opinions of Heraclitus, and the one most emphasized by his disciples as described in Plato's Theaetetus. You cannot step twice into the same river, for fresh waters are ever flowing in upon you. It's just like the sun is new every day. His belief in universal change is commonly supposed to have been expressed in the phrase, "all things are flowing." Like those of all philosophers prior to Plato, are only known through quotations, largely made by Plato and Aristotle for the sake of refutation. When one thinks what would become of any modern philosopher if he were only known through the polemics of his rivals, one can see how admirable the pre-Socratics must have been, since even through the mist of malice spread by their enemies, they still appear great. However, this may be Plato and Aristotle agree that Heraclitus taught that nothing ever is, everything is becoming, and that nothing steadfastly is. We shall return to the consideration of this doctrine in connection with Plato, who is much concerned to refute it. For the present, we shall not investigate what philosophy has to say about it, but only what the poets have felt and the men of science have thought. The search for something permanent is one of the deepest of the instincts leading men to philosophy. It is derived, no doubt, from love of home and desire for a refuge from danger. We find accordingly that it is most passionate in those whose lives are most exposed to catastrophe. Religion seeks permanence in two forms, God and immortality. In God, the life after death is eternal and unchanging. The cheerfulness of the 19th century turned men against these static conceptions, and modern liberal theology believes that there is progress in heaven and evolution in the Godhead. However, even in this conception there is something permanent, namely progress itself and its immanent goal. A dose of disaster is likely to bring men's hope back to their older superterrestrial forms. If life on earth is despaired of, It is only in heaven that peace can be sought. Heraclitus himself, for all his belief in change, allowed something everlasting. The conception of eternity as opposed to endless duration, which comes from Parmenides, is not to be found in Heraclitus, but in his philosophy. The central fire never dies. The world was ever, is now, and ever shall be an ever-living fire, but fire is something continually changing, and its permanence is rather than that of a process than that of a substance, though these views should not be attributed to Heraclitus. The doctrine of perpetual flux, as taught by Heraclitus, is painful, and science, as we have seen, can do nothing to refute it. One of the main ambitions of philosophers has been to revive hopes that science seemed to have killed. Philosophers, accordingly, have sought with a great persistence for something not subject to the empire of time.